if you've been around harpists or a harp that frequently, you've probably heard us talking about enharmonics or enharmonic equivalents. Now, what we mean by that is on the harp, you can get the same pitch from multiple strings, or two different strings in this case. Now, this is something that we can use really effectively on the harp to be able to sometimes navigate tricky pedals, but we can also get really cool effects like the chordal glissandi that I did or the timbral trill. So we're going to delve into all things enharmonics today. Hi, my name is Danielle Kuntz. I'm a new music harpist, and my mission is to help composers learn how to effectively and creatively write for the harp. Now, the strict definition of an enharmonic note is the note that has the same sound or the same pitch, but two different names. So an enharmonic equivalent for C natural would be B sharp. An enharmonic equivalent for E flat would be D sharp, and so on and so forth. Now, for some instruments, this doesn't make much difference because, like on the piano, if you play an E flat and a D sharp, they are literally the exact same key. So that doesn't make a whole lot of difference on the way that it's notated. You might err more toward notating the theoretical pitch rather than the played pitch, because the played pitch is going to be the same in either case. Now, on the harp, you are often going to be playing different strings depending on how the pitch is notated. So you do want to be a little bit more precise. This is a little bit more akin to like string players if you want to notate a certain pitch played on a specific string. For instance, playing a higher D on the D string, which would require the violins to shift up a little bit higher in order to get a specific timbre or color. That's a little bit more akin to what we have on the harp. One important note is that not every note on the harp has an enharmonic equivalent. Each string on the harp can produce three different pitches, so it can have the letter name in flat, natural, or sharp. So a C can produce C flat, C natural, C sharp. D can produce D flat, D natural, C sharp, and so on and so forth. So if we're talking about all the enharmonic equivalents, most notes do have an equivalent, but there are several that don't. So for instance, G natural doesn't have an enharmonic equivalent because you cannot produce an F double sharp on the F string, and you cannot produce an A double flat on the A string. We don't have double sharps or double flats available. So there are some notes that are not available to double, but there are a lot that are. So why do you need to know about these? The first thing is just being a little bit aware of how you notate music. On the harp, flats tend to sound better than sharps simply because the discs are all open in flat position, so the harp is going to be more resonant. So you might want to consider, if you're writing in a key, writing in more of a flat key rather than more of a sharp key. I would consider this for solo or small chamber writing, where it can be more effective for the harp to play in more of a flat key compared to like string players. Conversely, I would be a little more wary of using the strategy in orchestral writing, where you're not going to hear that shift in timbre quite as much, and it has more potential for confusion for rehearsal purposes. Now, the other use that I illustrated earlier is in doing the trills, where you can alternate between the same pitch on two different strings, and that has a really cool color. This has been used throughout harp music. Parachelle Vers was one who used this pretty extensively. If you want to delve a little bit more into this, Parachelle Vers' La Mandolin is a great example of this sort of writing. But there are a lot of options and capabilities for this. So for instance, you can use an E sharp and an F natural. So you have the exact same pitch here, and you can trill on that. Or you can do the same thing with a D sharp and an E flat. Now, the third use is you can do what's called a chordal glissandi, where rather than doing just a straight scale glissandi, which is what you would get if you were doing a glissando on the piano, where you really can only do like a white key or a black key glissando, on the harp, you can manipulate the pedals to be able to double specific pitches in order to apply specific chords. Now, this is something I'm going to delve deeper into in a separate video, but it's something that you can keep in mind if you're mapping out enharmonics, if you want to be able to produce a certain chord or imply a certain chord. Now, one thing to be careful of is that using enharmonics often requires extra pedal changes, simply because you are often going to be pairing a flat with a sharp pedal, And if you're going to be shifting between those, you often have to change pedals often pretty quickly. That's not to say you can't use them, but it's something to keep in mind. If you're using Enharmonics, expect pedal changes, so be aware of what other difficult factors you might be implementing in. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, sometimes harpists do rewrite things enharmonically simply because it can solve some pedal dilemmas. So for instance, if you had a really tricky pedal change, for instance, if you had something that required a B pedal, but you couldn't actually change that pedal because your foot was changing a D pedal at the same time, using an enharmonic to give you an A pedal, for instance, could solve that problems. Harpists have also rewritten entire passages to be able to solve enharmonic issues. One example of this is Wagner's Fire music. I have a full video on that. I will link that here. But harpists actually play this in a different key than it was written, or using same pitches notated differently, which means different strings, in order to work around some of the pedal challenges. Strauss's Salome, the Dance of the Seven Veils, is another example of this. So I hope this helps. If you have more questions about enharmonics, please leave a comment below and we'll continue chatting about this. Until next time, bye.